What's up everyone, it's Marco from PhoneDog.com, and this little guy is the HTC One Remix, or essentially the HTC One Mini 2, just branded for the Verizon wireless network here in the States, but on the inside of it, it's basically the same device. The biggest difference you'll probably find is going to be lying in the software because, well, there's going to be Verizon bloatware on this guy instead of just HTC's international software. But the big question here is, if you do want a great premium smartphone, just not the big size or the big price tag of the HTC One M8, is this the phone for you? So it's the HTC One Remix full review right here at PhoneDog.com, and let's dive into it. Right, so when the HTC One M8 was announced, it was a spectacular device. It was made of metal, had a beautiful display, and a fantastic design. But some said it was too big, too heavy, and too slippery. So the obvious solution is to make a miniature version of it, and this is HTC's second attempt. So let's see if they've made any improvements from the HTC One Mini. Let's first take a look at the size of the HTC One Remix. It measures in at 5.4 inches tall, 2.5 inches wide, and 10.6 millimeters thick. So funny enough, it's almost the same dimensions of the HTC One M8, plus it's actually even chunkier. It uses much more polycarbonate on the Remix than the HTC One M8. It's right in line with the original HTC One M7 at 70% aluminum and the rest polycarbonate. But it does make for a much more grippy device in the hand. But to be honest, I'm no longer a fan of the white and polycarbonate. I do like more of the gunmetal and black color of the other HTC One Mini 2 and the HTC One Remix. Next, let's dive into the internals of the HTC One Remix, starting up with the processor. It's a quad-core Snapdragon 400 processor clocked in at 1.2 GHz, wired next to the Adreno 305 GPU, and 1.5 GB of RAM. Internally, you'll find 16 GB of flash storage, but an addition of a micro SD card slot will allow you to add an additional 128 GB. While the hardware may sound last generation, it's still mighty fast to run Android, KitKat, and Sense 6.0, which you'll see later on. Screen-wise, it hosts a 4.5-inch display with many less pixels from the M8 at 1280 by 720, but it still has 326 pixels per inch, which is the exact pixels per inch as the iPhone Retina display. Even with a lower resolution display and fewer pixels than the HTC One M8, the panel itself is still really attractive. You won't see any pixels, the color and brightness are just of that of the HTC One M8, and the viewing angles are just as good thanks to its IPS LCD2 display. And these are all great things to have on a lower budget smartphone these days. Next, let's get into the real-world performance of the Remix. Even with last year's specs, it runs fairly smooth. Mainly it's due to the software optimization of both Sense and KitKat, but the hardware is still plenty powerful to run it all. Just the simple tasks of going through the menus, settings, and other bits of the user interface is pretty smooth and have no hiccups. Multitasking multiple applications is also fairly smooth, and maybe one or two hiccups here and there, but those only happen to me when I'm running GPU-intensive applications. Now, the features packed in the HTC One Remix are great, and to be honest, there's only one that I would like to be talking about, which is boom sound. And if you don't know, boom sound is one of the greatest inventions from HTC. It's simply putting speakers that face towards you instead of away from you, or worse, directly into the palm of your hand. And HTC gave us a little bonus of making them stereo speakers, so you actually have moving sound unlike any other smartphone that uses one channel for audio and mashing it all together. This gives the best multimedia viewing experience and hearing experience of any smartphone today. And even with these smaller set of speakers, they still produce a great, loud, and clear sound that can fill a great medium-sized room. Now, as I've stated before, the HTC One Remix runs Android 4.4.2 KitKat with Sense 6.0, basically the same you'll find on the HTC One M8. It's a very complementing skin to Android, but it adds things like blink feed, which I'm not a fan of, but thankfully you can switch those kind of things off very easily. Now, I do want to bring up the camera. The HTC One M8 was a great phone, but it had a 4 ultra-pixel camera and a second 2-megapixel duo camera that does that refocus trick. While it may be a cool feature, it didn't always deliver the best photo quality. But thankfully, HTC got rid of the duo camera and the ultra-pixel camera for the Remix, and then added a simple 13-megapixel camera. But don't hold your hopes up too high. It's definitely not the best camera around. Photo quality is average, colors are pretty spot on, but the contrast can be tricky at times. Autofocus is also pretty dang slow, and the 13-megapixel camera does struggle with low light. Outdoors, it will take decent photos, better looking than than the HTC One M8 even. And last but not least, the battery life. It has a non-removable 2100 mAh battery, which is 500 mAh short of the HTC One M8. But due to a smaller display, fewer pixels, and not as powerful hardware, it brings the HTC One Remix right in line with the average HTC device. With moderate usage, it will barely last a full day. I would say screen on time is right around 5 hours, and the total on time is around 9 hours. Not the worst, but also not the best. So the HTC One Remix or the HTC One Mini 2 is a worthy enough device to be called the HTC One. Its build is high quality, unlike any other budget phones, but yet again, this phone does cost a lot of money for being a budget device. Off contract, this phone is still around $600, and if you throw an extra $150 or $200, you'll land yourself an HTC One M8. So only look at the Remix if you really need that smaller device, and if you plan to sign a 2-year contract. But it's a solid choice for the few who need something in this category. And if you have any comments, make sure to leave them below. Plus, if you have any questions, ask them directly to me on Twitter to @phonedog_Marco. And as always, my name is Marco Hanna from PhoneDog.com, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.